Happy Tuesday, Trog fans. This is your TrogCast, two really old guys talking NCAA men's basketball in our last show for January here on the 31st, in a big week of things that are happening, lots of things to talk about. We'll get to all the big games of this week, and including to talk about the the Louisiana Tech Birmingham fight, and Jim's going to give you a little preview of the Atlantic 10. But first, we'll say hi to Jim, and then we'll go into this week's rankings. So how you doing there, Mr. Reaker?
Oh, I'm doing fine, Jeff. How are you doing yourself? On this last day of January, we're gearing up for February, which, of course, we know is a big month in college basketball.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one. As if the others haven't been, it's been a great year for college basketball. So let's jump right into it, if you don't mind. We have another new number one this week. We talked a little bit about it on our Razorcast the other day, but Gonzaga now becomes the fifth or sixth, depending on how you look at it. It's the fifth in the AP poll, which we usually go by, but Kansas has been named number one in the USA Today coaches poll. We talked about this one last week, but I'll throw this to Jim. First question is this a sign that Gonzaga is truly the best team in the country, or do they finally give in, figuring they couldn't pass up the only undefeated team in the country again?
Are they the best team in the country? I would say probably not. In fact, I would throw this at you: is if they had played the schedule of a Duke, Kansas, UK, would they be undefeated? And probably not. Not to say that they haven't played some challenging games. They've played, I think they got 4 what they consider real quality wins, teams that were ranked when they played them, but they just haven't played the schedule of, say, an ACC team, which we've talked about time and time again, which has maybe 10 teams that are going to be in the NCAA. But they deserve to be there. They haven't been defeated, and anytime you can go undefeated in an NCAA Division I schedule at this time of year, you're considered a really good team. We're going to find out, because now they got that bullseye on their back, and I think they play 3 of their next 4 games on the road. And, in NCAA basketball, we talk about how being at home is such an advantage, although we saw some big heavy hitters who lost at home this week. So things are crazy. It's almost like March broke out at the end of January here last week, I guess, because NFL didn't have anything going that NCAA thought they'd take the spotlight, and they did with a lot of big games. But, Mark Few, of course, he's going to say the right thing. He said rankings don't really count until after the NCAA tournament's over. It's the only one I'm concerned about.
Well, they were ranked number one other time, 2013. They went into the tournament ranked number one, and it's funny how people consider it a failure. They got to the Sweet 16 and then lost to the Wichita State team that made such a great run that year. But they've got an okay resume. I mean, they beat Iowa State when they were ranked number 19, and Iowa State's been hanging around in the rankings and beating some tough teams. They also beat Arizona, which now is ranked number 5, and they beat St. Mary's in their own conference, which is number 18. So they've got 3 wins against top 20 teams. It's nothing to sneeze about. But their conference is probably what keeps them back, as we talked about. Now the big question, as you say, with the road wins and if they can get them, big game this week. Most people are pointing toward BYU as one of the teams that might knock them off. They play them on Thursday, even though BYU isn't as good as everybody, I think, is puffing them up to be. They're just trying to make it a game. But can they hold it until tournament time? I mean, can they go into the NCAA tournament undefeated?
Well, that's going to be the challenge for them. And I tried to watch the Zags this weekend, but they were playing Pepperdine. And actually, I just looked up. Pepperdine is 6-16, actually, in last place in the West Coast. And that was a tough game to watch because it's hard to evaluate how good they are against a team like that. But, yeah, they're going to have a challenge from St. Mary's and BYU. Both those games, I believe, are on the road. And then I'm not sure where their tournament's played. But, again, one of those two could come up in the bracket again, and probably will if they're going to win it. So they're going to be challenged before the NCAA starts. The question I'd ask Mark Few, and he wouldn't answer honestly, but here's the question that you have to ask. Would a loss be good for the Zags at this point? to take that pressure off and the players to keep thinking about, hey, we might be the first team from since 1976 in the Indiana Hoosiers to go all the way through the regular season in the NCAA tournament undefeated. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think that'll happen. As I've said before, I don't think it'll ever happen again in NCAA history, just because of the parity and the level that NCAA basketball is at this point.
Well, that brings me to my next question is, Gonzaga, has a target on their back, and I think they could make it to the tournament undefeated. I don't think St. Mary's is as strong, and I believe they've already beat them on St. Mary's court. But are the other teams that are in the mix, and I asked you if Gonzaga was the top team. I don't think they are. I think they're in the top 6 or 7. They've got a very strong team, and they're better than most people give them credit for. I think it's just based to history. But are the other teams more than happy to let them keep that number 1 until tournament time so they don't have that target on their back? Let's just let this team that's going to slip through a weak conference keep it, and then we can just set ourselves up for March Madness.
Yeah, I think especially the major players, the ACC teams, the Big Ten teams, the Big East teams, they a lot of them have been there before. I don't think they really care about where they're ranked right now. I think everybody's kind of focused on how you finish this season, how you get through February, because the key is, and again, I've said 10 to 20, some people say maybe 10 teams could win this national championship, and the key really is, I think, in today's game is playing your best basketball at the right time. So going forward, as we look at February 1st tomorrow, I think we start maybe the most important part of the season as teams are playing in conferences, they're playing for seeds in their conference tournaments, and as they're playing really for seeds in the NCAA tournament, and they hope to just be playing well. You don't want to, stumble through February, lose a couple games that maybe you shouldn't lose, and feel a lack of confidence going into your league tournament or the NCAA. So again, I don't think anybody really cares that they're not number 1. Some of those big programs, Baylor probably has the best argument, and probably, I didn't check, but probably got the most votes of anyone because they have a very, very good resume with only that one loss, and that was at a very tough place at West Virginia, even though they did get blown out that night. So that's my take on it. I don't think anybody is that concerned that they're not ranked number 1 right now. So give it to the Zags. Let's see how you live out that number 1.
Well, it's true. And you look at Gonzaga, you go by other rankings in the BPI, they're 10th. Their strength of schedule is only 125th. And you bring up a key game that we'll talk about in a little bit. I mean, Baylor have to travel to Kansas this week, actually tomorrow night, and they're right now ranked number 2 and 3. Kansas got more first-place votes, but Baylor got more votes overall. And I'm with you, Jim. I don't think that I've said this a lot. I said it matters more when you get into conference play. When you look at the schedule over the past 10 days or so, 13 of the top 25 teams in last week's rankings lost to unranked opponents. And I think 16 of them had a loss. But, 13 of the top 25 lost to the people out of the top 25. That tells you how even it can be and how, like you say, the home court advantage and everything. And you look at something that we had our little side bet on that we'll have to push. The SEC Big 12 Challenge last year, and everybody thought the SEC was really down, and the Big 12 was one of the toughest conferences out there, and they ended up tied 5-5, and the SEC almost stole it from them because Baylor was treading water late in that game against Andy Kennedy's Ole Miss Rebels down in Oxford to get that 5th win for the Big 12. So I'm with you. I think it's just jockeying for position at this point and setting themselves up for the conference tournaments and then the NCAA.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too, that you see in all the games that happened over the weekend and even just last night is now we see teams lose at home that you don't expect. UK losing to Kansas at home. Butler losing to Georgetown at home. And then just last night, Notre Dame lost to Duke at home. So, I've always harped on, I think the home court advantage is big in NCAA basketball, but there are 3 cases that just prove me wrong. Butler losing to Georgetown was just a shock, and, again, just points to the parity of NCAA basketball this year.
Well, I think any time you're in an in-conference game, and that's why I bring up the SEC Big 12 Challenge. It shows you that you get wrapped up in your conference, and anything can happen in those conference games, those conference rivalries. You take a step back and try to play somebody else and give you a thing of that, because there really haven't been many out-of-conference games since the beginning of the new year. So it's going to be interesting as we go down. We're a little about two-thirds of the way through. They'll play through the schedule, as you say, and then we'll get lined up for the conference tournaments. And before we know it, we'll be talking about the bracket of 68. Got some big games coming up this week, but before we go, let's look back at last week just a little bit in another controversy that came up. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this on the sports programs. The benches in the Louisiana Tech, the University of Alabama, Birmingham teams emptied. And we've talked a lot, Jim, about discipline and who should handle it. And in this case, the refs took it directly in hand and basically banished everybody that left the bench, which is the NCAA rule, threw a bunch of people out of the game, and they had to finish the game 4-on-5. In an odd twist, even though the game was well out of hand, the people with 4 outscored the ones with 5, but the ones that had 5 on the court was the winning squad. And you got to step back and ask, with all the discipline questions we've asked, did the refs get it right?
Oh, yeah, it's a rule. You can't leave the bench or you're ejected from the game. So they, by the letter of the law, they did what they should have did, and sent the message. And we've talked about again last week, referring to the Xavier UC brawl back in 2011, and the fact that I think officials have to take more control of games. We see a lot of trash talking and things, intimidating actions take place during games. And I think if officials step in and say no, or throw a technical early and say we're not going to put up with this, I think it controls the game. So I totally agree with what they did. Obviously those two teams and maybe all of NCAA basketball teams seeing that say, hey, yeah, we got to keep things under control and keep things in perspective here, because you don't want to be suspended for a number of games that might be very, very important to your team for doing something like coming off the bench for a brawl or a scuffle.
Well, one of the most interesting suggestions I found, it made me chuckle, but then it made me think about it too. Somebody said in situations like this, or maybe in case of flagrant fouls, they should institute an NHL-style penalty box, and instead of just the free throws and the turn over the ball. Somebody's got to just sit out and you got to play 4-on-5 for a minute until you get that cut back. It's an interesting notion. I don't know that that's going to come to pass, but it would be fun to see that happen.
Would make the players think twice before they did something out of control.
Yeah, because sometimes they even get those in there. So it's be interesting to see as things gone by, as you see discipline handed out. And in this case, I'm with you. I think it was handled correctly in that the referees took care of it right then, right there. They didn't wait for coaches to try to handle it after the game, or to wait for school administrators or conference commissioners, even though two members of the Louisiana Tech squad were suspended by their conference for a game after that, saying that the whole incident was unacceptable. So we'll see. Well, let's get right into the meat of why we talk, which is games. I mean, we had a lot of great games last week, and we could go through all of them. You've already mentioned the Kentucky-Kansas game. Fantastic ending to the Villanova-Virginia game with a tip-in on the very last second. Like I've already said, 13 losses, or more than 13 losses, 13 teams. I think it was a total of 16 losses to unranked opponents. And this week might be a big one, too. You look at, in particular, for Creighton, Notre Dame, and Kansas. And those two of those three land in your pond. And Notre Dame, you mentioned Duke lost last night, and they've got to come back and play North Carolina on Saturday. That's in my neck of the woods. But Creighton's got big games against Butler and then Xavier. Xavier's now dropped out of the top 25, but still a tough team. And then Kansas, of course, like I just said, they have to play Baylor tomorrow night, and then they have to turn around and play their in-state rival Kansas State on Monday. And we all remember how that first game ended in Manhattan with the six-step non-travel to end the game. So who do you want to jump on there first, Jim? You want to talk about your Creighton Blue Jays?
You can talk about Creighton and Xavier a little bit because we talked early in the year. People were calling it the year of the freshman. I got a new term maybe. Is this the year of the injury? And I say that because, of course, Creighton lost Mo Watson, and the 2 games immediately after his loss, they lost. Xavier now has just confirmed yesterday has lost their point guard and second leading scorer, Edmund Sumner. It's yet to be seen how that's going to affect Xavier, but I don't know how it's going to affect them, but I know it is going to affect the way they approach games and they play. And look at IU, lost OG Anunoby, I only have to say that one more time this year, for the season, and now James Blackman has a leg injury out indefinitely, and the Hoosiers have slipped. In fact, they went to Northwestern this last weekend and got pummeled by the upcoming upsurging Wildcats of Northwestern. And then go back, remember that Kansas is playing without Udoka Azubuike, who was injured early in the year. They're big man. They're a little bit short there, and now they're even shorter underneath because Carlton Bragg has been suspended by the team for violation of team rules. That's stemming from an incident that happened in the dorm, and then they came upon some drug paraphernalia in his possession, so he's been suspended. So a lot about the way teams are going is not who they have, but who they don't have. And if you look at the opposite side of that, look at Duke. Remember, Duke started the season with some major injuries, and now they seem to have almost everybody healthy. And last night, as they defeated Notre Dame at Notre Dame, a very tough place to play, you had to start thinking, man, maybe the Dukies are getting everybody back. Of course, they don't have Coach McKay back yet, but maybe things are starting to come in focus now for them and come around because of who is playing. And you have to say, Luke Kennard, I don't know if he'll be voted player of the year, but I've watched him a few times, and he's just an unbelievable player. Is he an NBA player? I don't know, but, boy, he can make things happen. He can hit shots. He can get his teammates involved. He just impresses me more and more every time I watch him.
No, you're right there. That's in my neck of the woods there in the ACC, and I told you, everybody sort of let Duke down. They've just got to get through these games with Jeff Capel, and when Coach K gets back. And, of course, he made his statement this week by saying, I'm going to lock you out of the locker room, and you can't wear any Duke memorabilia around campus. And they have responded. They're going to be there, and Luke Kennard is something. I would say in addition to the injury, I think it's also going to be the year of the leader. And who pops up in that. And that's where some of these teams that are counting on the one-and-dones or the young kids might be a little hurting in some of these other squads that have people. And I think of a Josh Hart, Villanova, or other teams that have got that person that can pull the youngsters aside and say, hey, we got to stick together. So, but I'm with you. So, it's going to be an interesting week. Creighton is down. They took a couple on the chin. They came back and won. Butler's a little wounded now, which is making the Big East not seem as big as they were. But can Creighton, who's sitting down at number 22, the question is, if they go 0-2, does that move Creighton back out of the top 25 and Xavier back into the top 25?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about the leadership. I think that's very, very important. An example I would use there is UK, who always has, of course, a plethora of young players, and I think maybe that's what hurts them many times is they don't have that leadership out on the floor. Nobody's really stepped up. And of course, it's hard for a freshman to step up and be a leader, especially when everybody knows he's probably going to be playing in the NBA next year. So I agree with that. Looking at Creighton, they do have a player, I believe his name's Marcus Foster, who's a transfer from somewhere, and he's one of those senior transfers. So it's his first year there and his only year there. I think what I've seen is Coach McDermott's tried to make him the leader, but again, it's his first year there. How much respect does he have from the other players? That remains to be seen. And again, with Xavier, the key there is maybe that Edmund Sumner really isn't a vocal leader. I think they wanted him to be more and more of a leader, but if you got to pick a leader for the Musketeers, it's probably Trayvon Blewett, and of course he stepped up against UC, even though they lost that game, and then backed it up with another big performance at St. John's on Sunday to bring the Musketeers a victory. But it's awful fluid out there, and that's what makes it interesting this time of year. You want to watch this game. You want to see how things play out. Drama, that's what we have here going into February in the NCAA.
Well, that's the Big East, but the bigger thing doing in the Big 12, and that's tomorrow night. Baylor travels to Kansas, and you talk about Kansas being wounded. They certainly didn't look wounded in Rupp Arena the other day. Putting it to them, they're down early and just pounded back and would not let the Wildcats back in the game. Now they've got to turn right around and face a Baylor team. Like you say, it's only lost once on the road. Who do you like tomorrow night in Manhattan?
I like Kansas for two reasons. Number one, they're playing in Fog Allen Fieldhouse, which we've talked about before. I think when I gave you that as a trivia question early in the year, that is the toughest arena in the country. In fact, I saw where Bill Self, I'm not sure how many years he's been there, he's only lost there maybe 9 times in all of his years there. The other factor is they have a backcourt that was a lot of people picked as maybe the top backcourt in the country early, and they hadn't maybe lived up to their billing, but I think they're starting to play together and come together, and that's Frank Mason III, and the other one is Devontae. His last name is eluding me, but he played a very good game against UK.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. You're picking the Jayhawks. I would go with that, too. I think Baylor is a good team. Who knows if they're ready to climb up to the upper rung and stay there. Of course, we got Gonzaga going to BYU on Thursday. I really don't think the Zags will have much problem with BYU. It'll be a tough game, but they should be able to handle them. And then the other real big matchup this week is number 5 Arizona has to travel to Oregon, who's now ranked at number 13 after a surprising loss to Colorado. At least I thought it was surprising when you look at it. I think Colorado's beaten them at home 4 of the last 5 years, so the Buffs have kind of got their number. But as we said in an earlier broadcast, this is the only time that Zona and Oregon play, and right now Arizona at the top of the Pac-12, and Oregon has the one loss in there, and this could decide the Pac-12 standings. And Oregon's got to go on and play Oregon State, and then they also hit UCLA and USC coming up in the next week or so. So tough week for Oregon. So this almost seems like a must-win for Oregon if they want to win the Pac-12.
Yeah, and you talked about early on, you picked Arizona, and you kind of stuck with them even after they stumbled a little bit out of the blocks, but now they're the only undefeated team in league play in the Pac-12. And going back to that Kansas loss, you mentioned another team had trouble at Colorado. Well, Kansas, if you look, they had lost 3 of the last 4 times they had gone to West Virginia. So that had kind of been their Achilles heel, too. So that wasn't, I don't think, a real big upset, so to speak. I guess maybe the way they got beat was maybe the issue there, what surprised people, because it was a double-digit loss for the Jayhawks. But, yeah, get back to the Pac-12. This is a big game, and I think, I watched them play a little bit. Lonzo Trier, he doesn't really light it up and score 20, 25 points, but I think he makes the rest of the team better, and that's why Arizona has come on here since they've had him back, I think, for about the last 2 weeks. I think he's only played in about 4 games, but they've looked very, very good in those 4 games where they've had him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting going down the stretch, and lots of teams out there. You still got UCLA, USC pulled off a couple of upsets again in the last week. You've got Oregon. This is a tough conference that people don't get to see as much because they're playing a little later, and we'll just have to see some disappointments in there too, with Washington not being as good as Markelle Fultz, and Stanford, which is usually pretty tough, not quite living up to their billing. But they've got a lot of great teams in there. It'll be interesting to see how things play out. We'll talk about a lot of those next week, and then on Monday another big game in the ACC when Louisville has to travel to Virginia. We could talk about the ACC for minutes upon minutes every week. We just got to see how that lays out and see how many of them end up in the NCAA tournament. Well, in our our series that we're going to look at leading up to the NCAAs. Last week we looked at the American Athletic Conference and, basically talked about Cincinnati a lot, SMU in there a little bit, Houston on the periphery, a conference that might only get one or two teams in the NCAA. You looked this week, I think, at the Atlantic 10. So give us the prognosis of what's going on in that storied conference.
Well, the Atlantic 10 right now has 4 teams really in play, although Joe Lunardi's saying at this point it's probably going to be a 2-bid conference. And here's the thing with these conferences like the A10 and the American we've talked about, probably Conference USA is another one, the MAC conference, is because conferences like the Big Ten and the ACC are looking to put 8 to maybe 10 teams in the NCAA. That's probably going to really cut back on the number of teams coming out of leagues like the A10 and the American. So it's going to be very, very important to finish strong. In the A10 specifically, probably the top 2 teams you got to say right now are VCU and Dayton. And actually they just played last Friday night. They played at VCU, and VCU was able to pull off the win over Dayton there. Richmond's in the mix also. They're actually a half game ahead of both them just by a mere fact that they've played another game. So they're 7-2. VCU and Dayton are 6-2. The team that a lot of people thought at the beginning of the year was going to be the big team out of the Atlantic 10 has stumbled a little bit. They are in 4th place right now. Only a game behind Dayton and VCU is Rhode Island. But again, I think it's so important for these leagues that you either win the league championship, because here's what else could happen in the A10 and the Atlantic 10. Say a team from the bottom half wins their tournament. Now maybe one of the 4 or 5 teams at the top doesn't get in that might get in, or 1 or 2. So, for them, the regular season, the end of this season, I think, is very, very important. I think most people think talent-wise and on paper and all the comparisons that they do that Dayton's probably the best team in the A10 right now. But, again, it's a long way. They got a lot of games. And, again, this is why league play gets so exciting in the month of, I almost said November, February.
It's spring, fall, same sort of thing. Yeah, when you're looking at a conference that's got 11 of the 14 teams with a winning record and they're still playing each other, it'll be interesting to see how it falls out. Now, Richmond does have to face VCU this week, I think tomorrow night, and that'll let Richmond know where they stand with everything. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. One of the problems with these conference tournaments is, you get somebody who gets all fired up, and the league champions kind of back off a little bit because they've won it thinking they're getting a bid, and then somebody like St. Louis that's sitting at 6-15 makes a run in there, or Duquesne, which is at 9-13 now, or Fordham, these teams you don't think about, they win it, they get the automatic bid, and makes it a little more difficult for the other things. I read an article this week that said that there may not be but a handful of sort of at-large bids outside of the big conferences. So it's going to be interesting to see how February plays out, the tournaments, and see what the NCAA is. And when we get there, Jim, I have a solution to that, but we won't go into it.
I know what your solution is, I think.
Well, I said we're not going to go into that just yet.
Oh, okay. Here I have for you. You want the story the day after the 68 chosen teams comes out? I'm going to give you the headline right now.
Go ahead, Jimmy the Reek.
Why did you fill in the blank ACC team get in with 10, 11 losses over you fill in the blank MAC, A10, Atlantic, Conference USA team that only had 4 or 5 losses? And, of course, the answer is going to be because those 10 losses were to quality teams within their conference, or some of them, a lot of them were, and that the team from the what we call the mid-majors didn't have any outstanding wins outside of their league. So, but, that's going to – and I think the NCAA or whoever, ESPN, is going to play off this because they're going to start, here in about a week or so with their top 16 seeds or whatever. So they're going to make money off of this. But it's a good time to do it because, again, I think this is going to be the most disputed 68. In fact, it'd be interesting to see if Joe Lunardi and or who all the experts if they can come up with the 68 before they're actually named.
Well, they've been doing it since the beginning of the year, and the show's just going to headline. I think the show's stupid with an STOOPID, but a lot of people will watch and they'll make money off of it. It's not like the weekly football program where it might have affected the playoffs because it changes so much in college basketball. But if people are watching it and car companies and beer distributors are going to pay ads on it, knock yourself out to fill the 24 hours. Okay? Are you ready to go on in our conclusion with our trivia and tidbits?
Well, one other, you forgot one other part of our show that I know there's
got to get the Mastodons in.
Yeah, got to get the Mastodons in. Mastodons went 2-0 in the week, beat the Ooey Pooey Jaguars and Oral Roberts to improve to 16-7 and move them up to third place in the Summit Conference with a 5-4 record. They're, I think, two games behind the two leaders, South Dakota State, North Dakota State, but they're moving up. They're going to get a good seed. They're still going to win the Summit tournament. I feel it. And they're still going to be playing in the round of 32 and making a little noise. And so for you Mastodon fans, I'm sure there's at least one of our listeners out there that tunes in every week to listen to the Mastodons. We had a rough stretch there. They went on the road and lost a few games in league. And you can't blame. You got to go to North Dakota and South Dakota to play basketball, really? That can't be a fun trip. So that's our Mastodon minute for.
And now Phil Jackson is scowling at you. He's from that area, so don't make fun of it. We'll see in a couple weeks on the 15th and the 18th. They host North Dakota State and South Dakota State back to back like they had to travel there, and I think that'll tell your season. So let's. On this day after the 62nd birthday of Michigan State's Tom Izzo, happy birthday to him. I'm sure you have something that you would very much like to stump me with.
I have two trivia questions for you today.
Okay.
Here's my first. This is you know how I do my trivia questions. It's something we've talked about today. So do you know what the trivia question involves today? You've had to think about that.
I just wait for you to ask them, Jim. I don't put that much thought into them.
Oh, come on. You got your Google set right now for... All right. What did we talk about today? We talked about number one team in the country, Gonzaga. And I heard somebody, I can't remember who it was, who was from the West Coast, who said, now that they're number one, maybe people will pronounce their name correctly. It's Gonzaga, not Gonzaga. So hopefully that happens. Of course, being a Xavier fan, I know how that goes. People who aren't used to pronouncing the name sometimes mispronounce it. But, so that's what it's going to be about. Do you want the easy question first or the hard question?
Well, they're all hard the way you give them, Jim.
Well, but there's one that you should get, but maybe not. I don't know. Go ahead, choose. Easy, hard. I'll go either way.
Let's do like the SAT. You got to get the easy one right before you can go into the hard questions.
Okay. Question number one about Gonzaga, the Bulldogs, or what we call the Zags. Who is their most famous NBA alum?
For all time?
All time. They don't have very many.
I mean, to me, it's the boy with the stash. Everybody's got to remember Adam Morrison and that boy stash. How long ago was that? 5-6 years ago? He didn't do as well in the NBA as people would have thought, but I think he was National Player of the Year. I probably goes back even further than that. He would be my guy. I don't know if he's the most successful one, but he's the guy that I think is remembered the most for Gonzaga basketball.
I like how you qualify your answers so you make some people think you're going to be right. Again, this is opinion, I guess, the way I was asking it. But most people would say that John Stockton is probably the most famous NBA alum of Gonzaga.
No, I would agree with you. No, I didn't think that far back. Just the picture of Adam Morrison and his stash came to mind. Yeah. But the picture of John Stockton in his short shorts hitting the cutter on the pick and roll. That was a beautiful thing.
All right, so now you got the hard question about Gonzaga. I can't even say it right now. Here's a tough one. You get Gonzaga. They have only won in the history of the school one NCAA team championship. Can you name the sport that they won it in?
How far do you have to dig to get that one?
Pretty far.
Yeah. Well,
I'll give you a hint.
No, I don't want to hit. I'm going to say up there in the great Northwest in the Seattle area, I'm going to say rowing.
Rowing. That's a good answer, but yeah, this is tough. I had to make sure you didn't get this one right. In 1950, Gonzaga's boxing team won the NCAA championship.
This will tell you, he makes fun of me when I bring up things that are basketball related, but he has to go to the boxing championship to try to stump me because he thinks I'm on Google all the time. All right, not on Google all the time, but hey, every once in a while I guess right and then go national. Those are great questions, and for Mark Few and the folks out there, I mean, the wonderful thing about this is it gives a school like Gonzaga the publicity it deserves. It's sad that it's through athletics, but it's a fantastic small university, a lot like our Xavier here in Cincinnati, and the Jesuits and a lot of religious programs establish them throughout the country. And check them out because you're going to get a heck of a education at all those places. So the boxing 1950 NCAA champions were they called the Bulldogs then, or you have some name like they were called the Inuits or something else like your Webfoot with Oregon last week?
Now for my digging, I did a little digging that direction. They've always been called the Bulldogs ever since they took a mascot name. So, and actually they tied for the national championship that year, and I can't remember who they tied with. It was another like Idaho or somebody, but I don't know. Yeah, I dug pretty deep for that one. I had to make sure. I thought you'd get the other one right, so I had to set you down. But
it's not good enough that he can make all these great predictions like he did last week when he stated that number 1, number 2, and number 4 would all fall in the same week.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
We talked about it enough on Thursday, but yeah, I just gave you credit because I thought you'd bring it up. But yes, if you weren't here last week, that Villanova would fall, and that Kentucky would lose to somebody outside, and that Kansas would lose to West Virginia, and all of those things happened. It's you got to listen to Jimmy the Reek and get your money to Vegas. We'll see how good he is when we get to our NCAA bracket. See if he can predict. We won't make him predict the champion, but at least see if he can predict the Final Four. We'll go from there.
One other issue we need to clear up.
Yes.
So we tied on the Big 12 SEC Challenge. We went 5-5. So does that mean that we have to just buy each other a cold beverage?
I'm sure we could work something like that out. It's not like we've never done anything like that in the past. So, yes, that's what we will do. You buy me one, I will buy you one.
All right, that works for me.
And join us on Thursday for our RazorCast. That's Reaker and Zink talking about Xavier basketball. Lots of things to talk about this week, and we'll save them for all then. A couple little trivia tidbits we'll end you with. We're going to have a somber goodbye to Charles Shackelford, who's one of the stars of Jimmy Valvano's North Carolina State team. Not part of that national championship team, but after, unfortunately, he was a bit star-crossed. Big man in and out of trouble for 3 years with the Wolfpack before he declared for the NBA. 6 years in the NBA, several teams in Europe where he led them in rebounding. Unfortunately, he was found dead in his home earlier this week at the age of 50. Cause of death has not been released, but authorities have ruled out foul play. So another too young person goes by the wayside. And another melancholy tour, this past week, the last tour for the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus began. The next 4 months will be the last tour for the red and blue units that travel all over the country. And the final show for that storied program, if you've never seen it and try to fit it in, will be May 21st in Long Island. It's been around since 1870, and one of P.T. Barnum's big things was in 1884, he helped prove the stability of the Brooklyn Bridge to a skeptical New York crowd by parading his 21 elephants, including the famous Jumbo, and 17 camels across its length to prove to New Yorkers that it was safe to walk around that long span. Built by the Roebling family, who also built our very famous Roebling suspension bridge. So lots of things going on there. We hope that you'll join us again next week for our TrogCast. And again, join us on Thursday as we talk about Xavier basketball. Until then, we'll say goodbye to Jim and goodbye to our fans.
We'll see you, Jeff. Looking forward to another exciting week of NCAA basketball.